On a scorching summer afternoon in rural Kentucky, a silver Mercedes sat stranded on a lonely stretch of road. Inside, an elderly millionaire tapped the steering wheel, frustrated, his phone showing no signal. But then, out of the shimmering heat, a boy appeared, barely a teenager, his shoes worn thin, his t-shirt faded from too many washes. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He simply stepped forward to help. The man had no idea this brief encounter would uncover buried truths, challenge deep-rooted biases, and change both their lives forever. But not for the reasons you might think. Matthew Evans had built his life on numbers, deals, and influence. In his late 70s, retired from a lucrative career in finance, he lived in a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. Everything in his world ran on efficiency and control, the kind of life where problems were solved with a single phone call and a signature on a check. But that day was different. The Kentucky heat pressed against the windows of his silver Mercedes, the air conditioner struggling to keep up. A sharp hiss had forced him to pull over, a flat tire. In the past, roadside assistance would have arrived in minutes. Out here, in the quiet emptiness between small towns, his calls wouldn't go through. Frustration simmered. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to being vulnerable. But then, from far down the road, a figure emerged. A young black boy. Maybe 13 or 14, walked with purpose, his sneakers kicking up dust. His clothes were worn, his pace steady. Without hesitation, the boy began working on the tire, his movements quick and precise as though he'd done it 100 times before. When Matthew tried to offer money, the boy shook his head, gave a polite nod, and walked away. Matthew sat in the driver's seat afterward, watching the small figure grow distant in his rearview mirror. Something about that moment unsettled him. It wasn't just the boy's refusal of money, it was the quiet dignity, the calm self-assurance. He didn't know it yet, but that brief roadside encounter would send him on a journey that would unravel. His assumptions reveal the unspoken barriers in their worlds and test his understanding of what true generosity and justice really meant. The next morning, Matthew woke with the boy still on his mind. He had met thousands of people in his lifetime, investors, business partners, employees, but every interaction had been an exchange, favors, deals, negotiations. This was different. The boy had given something with no expectation, no name, no number, not even a hint at wanting anything in return. That puzzled him, and it bothered him. He decided to find the boy. Driving back to the same stretch of road, he scanned the horizon, stopping at gas stations and diners to ask questions. Most people shook their heads, but one woman behind the counter at a small cafe paused. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said. "Helps people all the time. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." Harlan was an hour away, tucked deep in the Appalachian foothills. As Matthew drove, the landscape shifted. Neat lawns and wide driveways giving way to cracked sidewalks, sagging porches, and small corner stores that had seen better days. When he reached Elijah's home, he saw a modest, weathered house with peeling paint and a porch that leaned under its own weight. Inside, Elijah's mother welcomed him with a mixture of politeness and caution. She worked hard, she explained, and Elijah helped however he could, mowing lawns, carrying groceries, fixing small things for neighbors. In the backyard, Matthew found Elijah repairing a fence with mismatched boards. The boy looked up, surprised, but calm, as though unexpected visitors were a normal part of life. They spoke briefly, and Matthew realized something. Elijah didn't see his actions as special. To him, helping people was just what you do. But as Matthew looked closer, he noticed signs of struggle, patched-up furniture inside, a broken swing set, tools worn nearly to breaking. This family didn't have much, and yet they gave freely. That realization stirred something in him, and with it, an uncomfortable awareness. He had built his career in a world where people like Elijah were often invisible, their kindness taken for granted, their struggles ignored. Worse, he knew that in many places, Elijah's skin color alone would shape how people treated him, regardless of his character or abilities. The more Matthew thought about it, the more he recognized the imbalance. He had lived his life with open doors, easy trust from strangers, and instant respect simply because of who he was and what he looked like. Elijah would have to prove himself at every turn and still face suspicion. Matthew left that day knowing he couldn't just walk away. Helping with a flat tire was a small act, but it had revealed something bigger. A truth about generosity, privilege, and the quiet strength it takes to keep showing up in a world that doesn't always see you. Within a week, Matthew returned to Harlan. But this time, he wasn't alone. A small convoy of trucks followed behind him, loaded with lumber, paint, shingles, and tools. Skilled workers stepped out, ready to begin repairs. At first, Elijah's mother protested. "We've managed fine on our own," she said, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. But Matthew looked her in the eye and told her this wasn't charity. It was gratitude. Gratitude for a boy who had reminded him what integrity looked like. The work began. The sagging porch was torn down and rebuilt, the leaking roof replaced, the cracked walls mended and painted. In the backyard, the broken swing set was replaced with a sturdy new one, its chains gleaming in the sunlight. At first, Elijah stood off to the side, watching. But soon, curiosity pulled him closer. He peppered the crew with questions about measurements, tools, and building techniques. One of the carpenters handed him a tape measure, and that was it. The boy was hooked. He began shadowing the workers, learning, listening, absorbing every detail. Matthew noticed something shift in Elijah's expression. A spark, the kind of ambition that comes from seeing possibilities for the first time. But Matthew also noticed something else. The way some people passing by glanced at Elijah, noticing the color of his skin before the skill in his hands. Measuring him by their prejudice instead of his potential, it hit Matthew like a weight. Even here, in the middle of generosity and goodwill, bias lingered, unspoken, but present. Elijah would grow up carrying that burden no matter how hard he worked or how kind he was. And that's when Matthew made a decision. This wouldn't just be a renovation. It would be an investment in Elijah's future. If the world was going to put obstacles in his way, Matthew would help him build the tools to climb over them. By the time the final nail was hammered in, the house stood proud. But what mattered most wasn't the new wood, the fresh paint, or the shining kitchen counters. It was the beginning of something far more lasting. A bond, a promise, and a quiet rebellion against the unfairness that still existed all around them. The final day of work felt like a celebration. Neighbors dropped by with fresh bread, jars of homemade jam, and small gifts for Elijah's family. Laughter spilled across the yard as children tested the new swing set, and adults admired the changes. Matthew stood on the porch, leaning against the new railing, watching it all unfold. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in decades, a deep, unfiltered warmth that came not from possession, but from connection. Inside, Elijah's mother served sweet tea, her eyes still glistening. "You've done more than fix a house," she told Matthew quietly. "You've given us hope." But Matthew shook his head. "You gave me something first. You reminded me what matters." In the weeks that followed, Matthew kept returning to Harlan. He arranged for Elijah to shadow the construction crew on other projects, learning carpentry, plumbing, and electrical work. It wasn't just about skills. It was about giving him the confidence to see himself as capable, deserving, and unafraid of opportunity. Yet Matthew couldn't ignore the truth. Elijah's path would still be harder than his had ever been. not because of a lack of talent, but because of the way the world too often judged people like him before they even spoke. That knowledge stayed with Matthew, fueling his determination to open doors that might otherwise remain closed. Months later, when Matthew visited again, Elijah was helping a neighbor repair a broken fence, the same way he had first helped Matthew. The boy's face lit up when he saw him, but he didn't stop working. Matthew realized then that no matter what obstacles came, Elijah's kindness was unshakable. That was his strength. And in a world that too often tried to break that spirit, protecting and nurturing it was the most important thing anyone could do. As Matthew drove home that evening, he knew this wasn't just about a flat tire or a renovated house. It was about a truth he wished more people understood. Sometimes the greatest change starts with the smallest act of decency and the courage to offer it freely. So the question is, in your own life, if you saw someone in need, would you step forward without asking for